The private jet touched down at Beijing Capital Airport at exactly 3:17 a.m. No press, no official delegation, no fanfare. Just Vladimir Putin stepping onto Chinese soil in complete darkness, his security detail moving like shadows across the empty tarmac. This wasn't on any official schedule. This meeting didn't exist. But what happened in that room over the next 4 hours would reshape the global balance of power forever. Putin had flown halfway around the world for this moment. Xi Jinping was waiting in a secure compound outside Beijing, a location so classified that even their closest advisors didn't know where they were meeting. The Russian president's face was unreadable as always, but inside, his mind was racing. The message she had sent through encrypted channels 3 days earlier contained just 7 words: "Come alone." The Americans don't know yet. But Putin had no idea what was about to happen. The black Mercedes convoy wound through empty Beijing streets. No traffic lights, no civilians, just the occasional flicker of surveillance cameras that had been temporarily disabled. Putin stared out the bulletproof window, his jaw clenched. In 40 years of intelligence work and political maneuvering, he had learned to read every situation, every person, every angle. This felt different. This felt dangerous. Xi Jinping stood alone in the center of a minimalist conference room, his hands clasped behind his back. When Putin entered, neither man smiled. Neither man extended a hand. They simply stared at each other for a long moment, two of the most powerful men on earth, alone in a room that officially didn't exist. "You came," she said in perfect Russian. Putin's eyes narrowed slightly. "You said it was urgent." She gestured toward 2 chairs positioned across from each other. No table between them. No barriers. Just raw conversation. As they sat, Putin noticed something that made his blood run cold. Xi's usually steady hands were trembling, just barely, but enough for someone trained to notice. And this is where everything changed. "Vladimir," she began, his voice lower than usual. "What I'm about to tell you cannot leave this room. Not your generals, not your closest advisors, not even your family." Putin leaned forward slightly. In all their years of diplomatic relations, she had never used his first name. Never dropped protocol. Never looked this vulnerable. 3 weeks ago, she continued, our satellites detected something the Americans thought they had hidden from us. She stood and walked to a secure tablet on a side table. He tapped it once, and a holographic display materialized in the air between them. Putin's expression didn't change, but his pupils dilated slightly as he processed what he was seeing. Satellite imagery. Military installations. Troop movements. But not just any troop movements. "They're planning to move," she said quietly. "Simultaneously. Taiwan, Ukraine, and something else. Something bigger." Putin studied the images, his strategic mind already calculating possibilities, outcomes, responses. But then she swiped to the next image, and Putin's careful composure cracked for just a moment. "You haven't even seen the biggest surprise yet." The hologram showed a detailed schematic of a weapons system Putin didn't recognize. The technology was at least 10 years ahead of anything either Russia or China possessed. The payload capacity, the stealth capabilities, the range, it was impossible. "Where did they get this?" Putin asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Xi's eyes met his. "That's not the right question, Vladimir. The right question is, where did we get this?" The room fell silent except for the faint hum of electronic jamming devices embedded in the walls. Putin's mind raced through possibilities, but none of them made sense. China's military technology, while advanced, wasn't capable of developing something like this independently. And if they had somehow acquired American technology? "We didn't steal it," she said, reading his thoughts. "And we didn't develop it." Putin waited. "It was given to us." "Wait, don't miss this detail." She walked back to his chair but didn't sit. Instead, he pulled out a small device that Putin recognized immediately, a personal signal scrambler, the kind used only for the most sensitive conversations. Even in this secure room, she was taking extra precautions. 2 months ago, a man walked into our consulate in Geneva. American, but not CIA, not NSA, not any agency we could identify. He carried no identification, but he knew things that only someone at the highest levels of their government could know. Putin's jaw tightened. A defector. A high-level American defector with access to their most advanced military secrets. He offered us a trade, she continued. Complete technical specifications for their next-generation weapons systems, including the locations of all their classified development facilities, in exchange for guaranteed asylum and something else. What else? She finally sat back down, leaning forward so their conversation couldn't be overheard even by the most sophisticated listening devices. He wants us to stop them. Together. Before they can use these weapons. The implications hit Putin like a physical blow. An American insider was essentially asking the two most powerful adversaries of the United States to form an alliance to prevent, what? World domination? Nuclear war? Something even worse? But the shocking part was yet to come. She tapped the tablet again. This time, the hologram showed a world map with dozens of red dots scattered across it. Concentrations in Europe, Asia, the Middle East, South America. Putin recognized some of the locations immediately: Russian military bases, Chinese naval facilities, strategic choke points. These are their targets, she said quietly. Not for invasion. For elimination. Putin's blood turned to ice. He was looking at a comprehensive strike plan that would decapitate both Russian and Chinese military capabilities simultaneously. But the technology required to pull off such a coordinated global attack. When? Putin asked. Our source says they're accelerating the timeline. 6 months, maybe less. Putin stood abruptly, pacing to the far wall. His mind was already shifting into combat mode, calculating resources, alliances, countermeasures. But the scale of what she was showing him. Why come to me? Putin asked. Why not handle this through official channels? Xi's laugh was bitter. Official channels? Vladimir, look at these targets again. Look closely. Putin studied the map more carefully. The pattern was clear once you knew what to look for. The strikes weren't just aimed at military installations. They were designed to eliminate specific individuals. Leaders. Decision-makers. The people who could organize effective resistance. Both their names were on the list. What you've seen so far is nothing. She activated another display. This one showed financial data, shipping manifests, communication intercepts. A massive operation hidden within legitimate government activities. They call it Operation Clean Slate, she said. The idea is to eliminate all major opposition to American global hegemony in one coordinated action. Make it look like accidents, natural disasters, internal conflicts. When the dust settles, America becomes the sole global superpower with no one left capable of challenging them. Putin returned to his chair, but his posture had changed. He was no longer Vladimir Putin the politician or the diplomat. He was Vladimir Putin, the former KGB operative, the man who had survived the collapse of the Soviet Union and clawed his way to the top of a dangerous new world. What does your source want in return? He asked. Proof that we can stop them. Together. He's not interested in helping us become the dominant powers. He just wants to prevent his country from becoming something monstrous. Putin was quiet for a long moment, processing everything. The alliance she was proposing would require unprecedented cooperation between Russia and China. Intelligence sharing at the highest levels. Coordinated military planning. Trust. Trust between two men who had spent decades as careful rivals. There's something else, she said, and Putin could hear the reluctance in his voice. Something our source told us about you specifically. Putin's eyes sharpened. You won't believe what happened next. She hesitated, then activated one final display. This one showed a single document, heavily redacted, but Putin could make out enough to understand what he was looking at. It was a psychological profile, incredibly detailed, analyzing his decision-making patterns, his personal relationships, his deepest fears and motivations. They've been studying you for 20 years, she said quietly. Every decision, every reaction, every public appearance. They think they can predict exactly how you'll respond to any given situation. Putin's face remained impassive, but inside, he felt something he hadn't experienced in decades, genuine surprise. Not just at the depth of American intelligence gathering, but at the implications. They're planning to use that against you, she continued. Create situations designed to manipulate you into specific responses that serve their purposes. Make you think you're making independent strategic decisions when actually I'd be dancing to their tune, Putin finished. She nodded. Putin stood again, but this time his movement was fluid, controlled. The initial shock had passed, and now he was thinking like the chess master he had always been. If the Americans thought they could manipulate him using psychological profiles, they were about to learn a very expensive lesson about underestimating their opponents. Your source, Putin said. I want to meet him. That's complicated. How complicated? Xi's expression darkened. He's not just any American official, Vladimir. He's someone you've met before. Someone you thought you could trust. And this is where everything changed forever. The silence in the room became oppressive. Putin ran through his mental catalog of American officials he'd met over the years. Presidents, secretaries of state, intelligence directors, military leaders. The list was long, but the number of people with access to the kind of information she had shown him was very small. Who is it? Putin asked. She looked directly into his eyes. Someone who attended your daughter's wedding. Putin's world tilted. The list of Americans who had been invited to such a personal, private event was incredibly short. People he had considered not just political contacts but personal friends. People he had shared meals with, people who had been guests in his home. The betrayal cut deeper than any intelligence failure or military defeat ever could. I need a name, Putin said, his voice deadly quiet. She shook his head. Not until you agree to work with us. Not until you commit to stopping Operation Clean Slate. Putin was trapped, and he knew it. She held all the cards, the intelligence, the source, the timeline. But Putin also understood that this wasn't really about choosing sides. This was about survival. But wait, there's something she hasn't told him yet. She activated one final display, and this time Putin couldn't hide his reaction. His face went completely white. The hologram showed surveillance footage from inside the Kremlin. His private office. His most secure meetings. His personal conversations with his closest advisors. All of it recorded, analyzed, archived. How long? Putin asked. At least 5 years. Possibly longer. Putin closed his eyes, his mind racing through every sensitive conversation, every strategic decision, every moment he had thought was private and secure. The Americans hadn't just been watching him, they had been living inside his decision-making process. The security breach, Putin said, his voice hollow. It's not just intelligence gathering. They've been steering my decisions. She nodded grimly. Creating situations, providing information, manipulating events to get the responses they wanted. You haven't been making independent choices, Vladimir. You've been following their script. The revelation was devastating. Putin prided himself on his strategic thinking, his ability to outmaneuver opponents, his careful control of every situation. To learn that he had been unknowingly playing someone else's game for years. What happened next shocked everyone watching. Putin stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. For a moment, she thought the Russian president might attack him, might blame him for delivering this crushing news. Instead, Putin walked to the window and stared out at the darkness. How do we know this isn't part of their plan too? Putin asked. How do we know your source isn't feeding us exactly what they want us to hear? It was a fair question, and she had been asking himself the same thing for weeks. Because, she said quietly, our source provided us with something they couldn't fake. He activated the tablet one final time. This display showed real-time intelligence, troop movements happening right now, communication intercepts from the last 24 hours, satellite imagery that was hours old. Operation Clean Slate begins in 72 hours, she said. The initial phase targets are nuclear command structures. They're not waiting 6 months anymore, Vladimir. They're moving now. Putin turned back from the window. Then we have 72 hours to stop them. But they had no idea what was about to walk through that door. As if summoned by Putin's words, the secure conference room door opened. Both leaders spun toward the entrance, their hands instinctively moving toward concealed weapons. No one was supposed to know about this meeting. No one was supposed to have access to this room. A figure stepped out of the shadows. Average height, unremarkable face, wearing a simple black suit. But Putin recognized him immediately, and the recognition hit him like a physical blow. It was James Matthews, former U.S. Secretary of Defense. A man Putin had shared dinner with 6 months ago. A man who had praised Putin's strategic mind and called him a worthy adversary worthy of respect. A man who had been at his daughter's wedding. "Hello, Vladimir," Matthews said in accented Russian. "I believe you wanted to meet your source." The room fell into absolute silence. Putin's mind raced through the implications. Matthews wasn't just any defector, he was one of the architects of American military strategy. If he was here, if he was the source. Why? Putin asked simply. Matthews walked to the center of the room, his movements careful, controlled. "Because I took an oath to defend America. Not to destroy the world in America's name." She watched the exchange between the two men, understanding that something fundamental was shifting in the global balance of power. This wasn't just intelligence sharing anymore. This was a complete realignment of everything they thought they knew. You still haven't heard the most shocking part. Matthews pulled out a device Putin didn't recognize, some kind of advanced communication system. Operation Clean Slate isn't just about military dominance, Matthews said. It's about economic control, social engineering, population management. The people behind this plan, they don't just want to win. They want to redesign human civilization. He activated the device, and holographic displays filled the entire room. Not just military targets now, but civilian infrastructure. Power grids, communication networks, food distribution systems, medical facilities. They're planning to crash the global economy simultaneously with the military strikes, Matthews continued. Create chaos, desperation, dependency. When the dust settles, people will accept any government that can provide stability, even if it means giving up every freedom they've ever had. Putin and Xi exchanged glances. They were rivals, but they were also leaders who understood the responsibility of power. What Matthews was describing wasn't conquest, it was the end of human autonomy. Who's behind it? She asked. Matthews hesitated. That's the part that's going to be hard to believe. Putin's patience snapped. Everything I've heard tonight has been hard to believe. Just tell us. It's not just the current administration, Matthews said. This plan has been in development for decades. Republicans, Democrats, military, intelligence, corporate interests, they've all been working toward the same goal. The differences you see in public are theater. The real decisions are being made by people whose names you've never heard. He activated another display, showing organizational charts that looked more like conspiracy theories than government structures. Shadow networks of influence connecting military contractors, intelligence agencies, multinational corporations, and financial institutions. But the timer was still counting down. 71 hours, Matthews said, glancing at his watch. The first phase targets your nuclear early warning systems. They want to blind you before they strike. Putin's strategic mind kicked into high gear. Countermeasures? Limited. They've been planning this for too long, gaming out every possible response. But there is one thing they didn't account for. What? Matthews smiled for the first time that night. They didn't expect you two to work together. The next few hours were a blur of encrypted communications, emergency protocols, and desperate planning. Putin and Xi, supported by Matthews' inside knowledge, began coordinating a response that would have been impossible just days earlier. Chinese hackers worked alongside Russian intelligence to identify and neutralize American surveillance networks. Russian military assets shifted to protect Chinese installations, while Chinese naval forces moved to cover Russian vulnerabilities. But with every passing hour, the timeline compressed. And then, just when they thought they had a plan, Matthew's communication device erupted in urgent signals. He listened for a moment, then his face went pale. "They know," he said quietly. "They know I'm here. They know about the meeting." Putin and Xi felt the walls closing in. If the Americans knew about their alliance, if they knew Matthews had defected, Operation Clean Slate would accelerate even further. "How much time?" Putin asked. Matthews checked multiple data streams on his device. "Hours. Maybe less. They're moving up everything." She stood abruptly. "Then we move first." Putin nodded. "Agreed." But as they began finalizing their emergency response, none of them noticed the small device that had been activated in the corner of the room. A device that had been recording everything. Because the Americans hadn't just been watching Putin and Xi. They had been watching Matthews too. The final phase of Operation Clean Slate was about to begin, and it included something none of them had anticipated: the complete elimination of everyone in that room. As alarms began sounding in the distance, Putin, Xi, and Matthews realized they weren't just racing to prevent a global catastrophe. They were racing to survive the next 24 hours. What happened next changed the course of human history forever.